This talk is hidden in plain sight. We're going to talk about steganography and how it relates to digital watermarking. So I'm Ryan Fox. I'm a software developer. I work a lot with image processing and computer vision. Steganography is one of the things I have some experience with. The word comes from the Greek steganos, for covered, and it's a little different from cryptography. Steganographic messages or data is not encrypted but encoded in a way that makes it not obvious that you're looking at something in the first place. We can think of stego versus crypto sort of along two axes, first being visible or invisible. I use those terms a little loosely because there's still a message in steganography, but the goal is to have an adversary not realize it's there. And then secure and insecure, again, I use the term a little loosely because at its heart, steganography is security through obscurity. You can combine the two if you encrypt your payload and then encode it steganographically, but usually once your adversary knows the message is there, the game is up. So if we fill in our chart here, if it's visible and insecure, well, that's plain text. If you encrypt that, you get some security. It depends on the strength of your encryption, but most people are familiar with that. If it's insecure and invisible, that's not really a signal. That's sort of just noise. And then if it's invisible, or invisible to our adversary anyway, that's what we'll call steganography. Now, the practice of steganography goes back millennia, but this is an example that I find illustrative. It's a letter from the Revolutionary War. It was written in 1777 from Henry Clinton to John Burgoyne. They were British Army officers, and Officer Clinton wanted to send some information along, pass some intelligence, but they didn't want the U.S. troops or rebel troops to realize what they knew if it were to fall into enemy hands. So he wrote this letter, and it's hard to read, but I have the text written up here. I'm not going to go through all of it, but one thing to note is towards the bottom here, Sir W. William, a British officer, Sir W.'s move just at this time has been capital. Washington's have been the worst he could take in every respect. So on the surface reading, it sounds like it's going quite well for the British and the Americans are really screwing it up. But you're not supposed to read the letter straight through. There's also a mask that when you overlay it, reveals the true message. And when you lay this mask over, we could see toward the bottom, Sir W's move just at this time, the worst he could take. Basically, the whole letter says the opposite of what the plain text reading says. This was uncovered some years later. It's an interesting example, I think, of pre-digital technology and steganography. So now that we've got an idea of what sort of data we're communicating, what sort of communication channels are there available, a lot of steganography takes place in a metadata channel or a side channel of communication. A lot is in imagery, but it's not necessarily restricted to an image. You can have an audio file or any signal, really. Images get used a lot, though. Many images have metadata attached to them, for example, EXIF. Whereas crypto is concealing the contents, stego is concealing the presence of a message. So you might see this picture on a website and say, oh yeah, great, it's a chameleon. But there's also associated metadata with that. Some of them are just editable text fields. So depending on your threat model, if you just need to pass a cursory examination, you could enter some information there. Or if you wanted to be more subtle about it, you could work out ahead of time some encoding scheme with your confederate where you're adjusting the timestamp or the dimensions of the image, where different data points signal different meanings. Here's another example from the real life and the pre-digital era. This is a microdot camera. from World War II. They're called microdots because the idea was to take a photo or an image and shrink it down to about the size of the dot on an eye or a period. For reference, the camera on the left is about the size of a quarter, and this is an NSA photograph of an envelope. It's a little hard to tell exactly what you're looking at here, but I think this at the top is the flap of the envelope, and then each of these are microdots. It is designed so when it was sealed up that would be covered, and each of those contains approximately a photograph's worth of information. This was useful in the days before digital transmission of data, so you could carry information on your person without being obvious that you have a stack of papers or trying to get through a checkpoint or something with secret information. Now with steganography, I find it useful to think of the various methods of encoding things along two more axes. One is whether it's fragile or robust. And when I say fragile, I mean fragile with respect to perturbation of the original signal or the cover signal. So if you modify that image or audio, is your covert signal still going to remain intact? And then whether it's obvious or subtle, your secret message. Now if it's subtle and fragile, again, we're kind of at no signal there. If you think of re-encoding a JPEG, there's some noise associated with that. If you re-encode it, it might be totally changed. There's nothing useful there. If it's obvious and fragile, that might be a caption. It could be easily cropped out or altered if it's fragile. If it's robust, that might be an image watermark. If you don't want someone to take credit for your photo, you can slap a watermark on there. Makes it difficult to remove, but then it's also readily apparent, and that's sort of the point of that style of watermark. Interestingly enough, we also call the subtle version a watermark, or digital watermark. So how does that work? Usually your information is, your stego text is encoded in the least significant bits of an image. So most digital images are 3 channels, red, green, blue, or grayscale, but we're going to talk about 3 for the purposes of this talk, and 8 bits per channel. So this is just a 3x3 RGB image I worked up here with some sample values. Now since it's 8 bits per channel, that gives us a value between 0 and 255. Now the binary representation of that, if we look at the rightmost bits, those only add up to 3, so out of 255, that's not going to change the visible intensity of any given pixel much, but you can encode 2 bits there. ASCII characters are 8 bits per character, so you could, if you took the bottom 2 bits of each pixel, you could encode a character per 4 bits, per 4 pixels per channel. So in this case, in the upper left of on the left is the original, and on the right I've altered the last 2 bits of each pixel to encode some characters. And I did so for the rest of the channels, and on the left it's the original unaltered one, and on the right one, the least significant bits encode the word cipher. Now there's not much to tell the difference here. If you're trying to stare at it, I'll save you the trouble. They're virtually indistinguishable to the human eye. And actually a downside of JPEG is that lossy compression will swamp out a lot of your signal. One side effect of it is that it provides noise, which provides some deniability. So you have to strike a balance between subtlety and robustness. Typically, steganographic images get encoded with about half a bit per pixel. The encoding scheme I outlined earlier was 2 bits per channel, so that's 6 bits per pixel. That's much stronger than you're probably going to use in a real-life application. But even then, in that naive encoding, it's not terribly obvious. So given that we have this problem with lossy compression a lot of times, how might you get around that? How might you detect if your image is, if an image you're looking at has a steganographic payload, or how might you circumvent that? Stego suffers from a similar problem to cryptography in that perfect crypto is indistinguishable from random data. If you're looking for a Stego signal, there could always be a more subtle scheme that you're not looking for. So it's difficult to prove a negative. One advantage when you're looking for it, though, is that since Stego is effectively security through obscurity, if you look in the right place, you can probably tell what you're looking at. Now, one way you might uncover that naive encoding scheme is look at a histogram of the least significant bits. This is the distribution from the Stonehenge image earlier. If we take the bottom 2 bits, we have 4 possibilities those values could take on: 0, 1, 2, and 3. And if we're assuming they're at the noise level of the image in general, we wouldn't have a strong reason to believe one occurs much more than the other. You also wouldn't expect them to be identical, but it at least passes the eye test. An interesting thing about ASCII characters is the uppercase and lowercase visible characters all start with 0, 1. So if you had a payload encoded in an image, you would expect to see a lot more of one and a lot less of the other ones. I took that Stonehenge image and encoded at about half a bit per pixel, and we can see that it does jump up a lot. So at least qualitatively, there's a difference here. Now, this doesn't tell you what the message is, but at least gives you an idea that something's going on. Maybe investigate that further. If you want to step up the level of complexity of your analysis, there's some more advanced statistical techniques. This is from a paper. There's a research group that has a couple. They do steganographic research. They have one system called Hugo for highly undetectable stego, and this is from SPAM for subtractive pixel adjacency matrix. SPAM uses a machine learning approach to train a detector, and these were 4 data sets they trained their detector on. And on the vertical axis is the error rate. So we can see for a reasonable number of parameters, given today's machine learning standards, there's pretty good accuracy rate of telling if something's going on or not. Depending on which data set you have, it's on the order of 5 to 10%. An interesting thing about the JPEG 85 set is they took the camera data set and just re-encoded it, saved it as a JPEG at 85% quality. And if you can see the error on the camera data set, 5 to 10% maybe, and it's orders of magnitude lower for the JPEG. So that filtering, while destroying some information, it preserves other information that, at least in the case of this detector, makes it much more apparent. So if you're given an image and you want to figure out if there's a steganographic payload, the statistical methods are nice, but you don't always have a large corpus of data to go off of. One method you can use to attack that is differential steganalysis. So if you have a repeatable way to generate an image, perhaps a screenshot of a computer application, if you can take identical images and subtract the difference, that shows you where things are changed. So if you suspect a timestamp is encoded, you could see that varying throughout successive screenshots. This is also kind of analogous to a technique sometimes used in detecting if an image has been digitally altered or photoshopped. It again counts on that lossy encryption to see what areas have been changed and what areas have remained the same if you save it re-encode at a lower quality level. So comparing the two gives you an idea of what things are different in an image. If you suspect you have an image with a steganographic message encoded in it and you don't want to distribute that, you can get around it in a few ways. The goal is to reduce the signal as much as possible while retaining the data you're interested in. You can convert to grayscale or decrease the resolution. If you can convey your message in less data than the original, maybe you just need a crop of your image or a crop of your audio file. You can also redact portions, similar to cropping, just throwing out data that's not pertinent, or introduce noise, or skewing, or warping. All just ways to reduce the space where a steganographic message might sneak through unbeknownst to you. So now I want to talk about some real-life use cases. It actually is used in the real world, outside of academia. Modern digital cryptography has put the damper on it a little bit, but it still gets used for not nefarious purposes even. There's a company called Digimarc. They have a product called Digimarc Barcode. There's actually a demo video online that's pretty nifty. One of their use cases is labeling, package labeling, like in a supermarket. And the way it works basically everywhere in the world is your package has a UPC or barcode on it, and that encodes some information about the product. So what Digimarc does is take that information and encode it all over the package. So instead of the cashier having to scan it past a barcode reader in a particular location, you can just point a camera at it, and all around the package that information is encoded. Unfortunately, Digimarc is a private company, so it's all proprietary, and not much is publicly known about how it works. They also have watermarking applications for other media as well, but the imaging one is pretty nifty. There's a nice video. Another one was in 2012, Blizzard's game, World of Warcraft. It was discovered that screenshots taken in the game encoded data about the player. I think this was found when someone went to a location in the game where the screen was all white or nearly white, and they took a screenshot and they noticed some artifacts in the screenshot that weren't visible in the game. And it came out that Blizzard was encoding the player's account ID, the timestamp the screenshot was taken, and the IP address of the server the player was connected to. We don't really know why they were doing this, but it was interesting that it was discovered just by a regular player. It wasn't a research or reverse engineering project. This is a really interesting one as well. This is called Font Code. It's from a research team at Columbia. This was published last month. The idea behind this one is to take a block of text, say a paragraph length, and perturb the glyphs or characters in sequence. So maybe the stem is a little wider on this A, maybe the serif is a little longer on this F. And by changing those characters individually, encoding information, and they also have a demo video that's pretty nifty. They have an app where they point their camera at a paragraph and it reads it, deciphers it, and shows the message alongside. Another real world one, this is sort of serious business too, is in anti-counterfeiting. This pattern of 5 dots in sort of a skewed cross is called the Urion constellation. When inkjet printers, or when desktop printers started becoming widely available and increasing in quality and decreasing in price, the powers that be were concerned about counterfeiting. They were worried they would advance to the point where you'd be able to print money at home that was indistinguishable from the real thing. So one of the features they introduced in currency to circumvent this is this pattern. Now the US 20 has these small 20 printings along the edges here, and the 20s line up in this pattern. You can also find it in euros. It's not necessarily numbers, it's any feature arrayed in this pattern. And most of the major photo editing or image editing suites, like Photoshop, will see this, and they don't want to cooperate or help you print stuff with this. Also relating to printers is something called microdots. These are different from the previous ones, but the idea is the same. Desktop printers, most of them nowadays, will encode information about the print job on the paper. They print these little yellow dots that are virtually invisible to the human eye, but with some photo editing you can bring them out. This is pertinent lately because there was an NSA employee in 2017 named Reality Winner, and she printed out some documents, classified documents, and turned them over to journalists. The journalists published them, but they published high-quality scans of the papers. They didn't retype them, they didn't alter them in any way, and the photos of the paper they printed was high enough quality that the authorities could recover the printer metadata, including the make and model and serial number, so where it was and when it was printed. That enabled them to narrow it down enough to determine who printed out the sheets and disclose the classified information. If you're interested in learning more about steganography, I recommend Gödel, Escher, Bach by Douglas Hofstadter. It's a book about computer science and AI and many things, but it's also about hidden messages and multiple layers of meanings. Got a little shout out from Randall Monroe of XKCD. I think Randall's right. It is a very meta book. So there's a lot there on encoding multiple meanings. If you want to learn more, everyone's favorite, Kali Linux has two programs, StegHide and StegoSuite, that both let you encode and decode steganographic audio and image files. The font code project lives on Columbia's website there. The Hugo and Spam papers are available online. If you want to read more recent publications, SIGGRAPH and CVPR occasionally publish Stego papers as well. That brings us to the end of our talk today. I'm Ryan Fox. Here's where you can find me on the internet. There's the slides as well. So thank you for coming out.